We began this course with a look at various forms of health inequality experienced by adults and some of the health behaviors that contributed to these inequalities. We then began to look at how individuals develop their cognitive abilities from birth through childhood and how certain key personality traits began to develop. More recently, we have considered how the culture or cultures a child experiences while growing up into adolescence and adulthood can affect how that child begins to express his or her personality through patterns of behavior. I would now like to link these two approaches, first by considering two landmark studies that have clearly established the long-term association between socioeconomic status and health, and then to consider one key aspect of early childhood behavior that has been shown through a classic experiment done at Stanford to be closely linked to well-being as an adolescent and as a young adult. Alameda County is part of the San Francisco Bay Area. It lies directly across the bay from San Francisco. Alameda County is extremely diverse. It includes high-income families in certain areas of the hills overlooking the San Francisco Bay, as well as low-income families and individuals in the flatter areas immediately adjacent to the bay. Alameda County is also home to the University of California, Berkeley. Accordingly, the county has a substantial number of highly educated individuals. Unfortunately, it also has some extremely weak public schools and a substantial population with low levels of education. Of course, most of the county is more in the middle, both geographically in the middle, between the hills and the flatlands near the bay, and in the middle socioeconomically. Not surprising, the county also has a wide range of racial and ethnic groups living within its borders. In 2010, the county's population was 34% white, non-Hispanic, 13% black, 23% Hispanic, 26% Asian, and 2% Native American or Pacific Islander. In 1965, public health researchers began what is referred to as the Alameda County Study. The study identified nearly 7,000 adults who represented the full range of economic, social, racial, and ethnic diversity in the county. One of the basic questions the study asked was, is there an association between an individual's economic circumstances at the beginning of the study and that individual's health status over a period of several decades? To answer this question, researchers ranked the individuals by percentiles based on their household income in 1965. They then followed these individuals at various times for nearly 30 years, evaluating how those individuals rated their overall health status on a scale of excellent, very good, good, fair, or poor. These graphs show the percentage of individuals at various income percentiles who rated their health as fair or poor at 4 different times. At the beginning of the study in 1965, in 1974, in 1983, and at the end of this phase of the study in 1994. The data are shown separately for men and for women. Two things stand out from these graphs. The first is the continuous downward slope of the lines, indicating that for every incremental step up the scale of income, there is a corresponding decrease in the percent of those reporting poor or fair health. Those in the middle of the income distribution were in better health than those at the lower end of the distribution, while those in the upper income range reported better health than those in the middle. The second thing that stands out is that the shape of the curves hardly changed over a period of nearly 30 years. While there was a slight tendency to report worse health as one got older, especially for higher income men, the shape of the curve relating income in 1965 to health over time hardly changed. To summarize, there are two important conclusions to be drawn from the Alameda County study. First, the association between income and health status represents a continuum, with every increment of higher income bringing with it better health. And second, one's income at a single point in time was consistently associated with health status over a period of several decades. In the 1960s, public health researchers in England were asking some of the same questions as those in Alameda County. Rather than looking at the association between income and perceived health status, the English researchers asked whether one's position in the broad social class hierarchy was associated over time with one's health status. The researchers chose to study a specific subset of the English population, those who were employed in the British civil service. Starting in 1967, the researchers began to follow individuals who worked in Whitehall, the large office complex in London that houses a number of government offices and agencies. The researchers categorized these individuals based on the nature of their occupation, using established rankings of the relative status of certain occupational groups. At the top were the administrative managers, essentially the bosses. The next occupational category was the professional and executive level workers who worked under the direction of the managers. The third category represented the clerical workers who supported the managers and executives. The final category was referred to as the other workers and represented relatively low-skilled workers, such as janitors or cafeteria workers. Starting in 1967, the researchers followed these workers for a period of 10 years, measuring the percentage of them who died over this time period. In making this measurement, they made statistical adjustment for differing age distributions among the various occupational groups. As shown in the graph reporting the first 10 years of follow-up, it did not take long for the differences in the chance of death among the various occupational categories to show up. Recall that these are fully employed government workers, all working in the same office complex in London. Recall also that by the 1960s, Great Britain had established its National Health Service, a nationalized system of health care that provided universal coverage to all members of British society. So any differences in health outcomes could not easily be attributed to differences in access to health care. Nonetheless, we see a clear hierarchy of health outcomes that continuously tracks the hierarchy of socioeconomic status, measured here by occupational status. The lowest status workers, the other category, had the highest death rate over time, with the gap widening with every passing year. Those on the next step, the clerical workers, had a lower death rate, with the executives on the third step having yet a lower death rate, and the managers having the lowest death rate of all. The principal conclusion to be drawn from this phase of the Whitehall study suggests that the association between socioeconomic status and health status is a continuous one. With every step up the socioeconomic ladder, there is a corresponding incremental improvement in health status, whether measured as one's perceived health status or as one's chance of death. The association between socioeconomic status and health status is not simply about whether a person is below some threshold of poverty. Individuals at all levels of status realize greater health benefits the higher they are on the status hierarchy, whether we are looking at those working in Whitehall or those living in Alameda County, California. Both the Whitehall study and the Alameda County study confirmed a basic relationship. The greater one's income or the greater one's occupational status, the greater will be one's health over time. Those at higher levels of social or economic status will perceive better health than those at levels below them and will have a lesser probability of death. There is, however, a more fundamental relationship underlying this association. The principal determinant both of one's level of income and of one's occupational status is the level of education one has completed. The greater one's level of educational attainment on average, the greater will be both one's income over much of the lifespan and one's occupational status. Both of these outcomes, in turn, are then associated with greater health status. We know that among the three factors shown here, education is perhaps the most important, such that greater educational attainment leads both to better health status and to better socioeconomic status, with these two outcomes highly correlated. Why, though, do different people have different levels of educational attainment? What makes some people persist in their educational efforts while others do less well educationally? Might there be a missing fourth factor that leads both to differing levels of education and to correspondingly different levels of socioeconomic and health status? What might such a missing fourth factor be? Behavioral psychologists have identified an important factor that may act as this missing fourth factor. This factor is often referred to as time perspective. Time perspective is a psychological construct that describes how one weighs past, present, and future influences in making a decision, particularly a decision in which one has to balance the relative rewards with the time it takes to attain those rewards. Am I willing to wait longer and work harder for a greater reward, or would I prefer a lesser reward now with less work or stress involved? Time perspective is thought to represent a subconscious cognitive response that people invoke when making decisions about short-term and long-term actions and goals. A superb example of how time perspective works is provided in an experiment conducted by Walter Mischel, then a psychologist at Stanford University. Stanford works with the Bing Preschool, a high-quality, well-respected preschool that serves as a laboratory for those studying child psychology. The school enrolls a diverse group of preschoolers. Mischel invited 4-year-old children into a room that has a variety of toys, referred to by both the children and the teachers as the game room. Each child was offered the chance to play alone for a while with the toys there and then to receive a reward for playing so well. The reward was a plate with tasty-looking marshmallows, something nearly every child likes to eat. Mischel explained to the child, "If you play with the toys for a while until I come back, you can have 2 of these." But then Mischel offered the child a second option. "If you don't want to wait until I come back, push this button and I'll come right back. Then you'll get 1 marshmallow." The researchers asked themselves, which children would wait until the teacher came back, about 15 minutes at the most, in order to get 2 marshmallows, and which ones would avoid having to wait so long by pushing the button and as a result getting 1 marshmallow. But Mischel and colleagues didn't stop there. They were able to follow most of the children until they were adolescents, with an average age of about 16 years. They contacted the parents of these children to get information about the child's personal and academic circumstances as a teenager. What they found was striking. As adolescents, the children who were able to wait for the delayed reward were more academically successful, more verbally fluent, more rational, attentive, able to plan ahead, and more able to deal with frustration and stress. Even among the children who chose to push the button, the longer the child waited, the better off he or she was on many of these academic and psychological measures. These results applied equally to boys and to girls. From this study, we can conclude 2 fundamental principles of psychology. First, as 4-year-olds, these children exhibited differing time perspectives. And second, those children willing to wait longer for a greater reward experience better personal and academic outcomes as adolescents. The evidence seems clear that those children who waited were better off as adolescents in a number of ways. The types of behaviors exhibited at adolescence by the children who waited at age 4, better academic ability, better social interaction skills, better organizational ability. These will clearly be associated with subsequent educational and occupational success as adults. Those children who chose not to wait will likely experience lower levels of success in these areas and, as a consequence, lower levels of well-being. But is it accurate to say that these children chose not to wait? Looking at Kahneman's distinction between thinking fast and thinking slow, in deciding to push the button to get the earlier yet smaller reward, Were the children using their System 2 slow thinking? Or were they instead acting on a System 1 response pattern that they had already internalized, much as we all have internalized the fact that 2 plus 2 equals 4? In our next lecture, we will move on to look at this concept of time perspective in more depth.